Good morning, Kurt Bickel. How are you doing today?
I'm blessed. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited actually about our conversation today. I mean, I always look forward to doing this, but for some reason today our topic feels really timely for me. So I'm looking forward to some conversation about building teams and committees and boards. I don't know about you, Kurt, but in my church world life and in my work life, it seems like it's a lot of conversation about building and rebuilding right now. A lot about what does it look like as we move forward, and a lot of that is committee and team and board work. And so it's been a lot of where my brain and where my head has been lately. How about you?
Yeah, well, we all work in teams, and we also have families. So the circles of relationships that we build are really important. And when it comes to our work, it's definitely one half of a good quality production. Yeah.
For sure.
Um,
Well, if you're watching us live today, please know if you're on YouTube Live or on Facebook Live, we would love to hear from you. If you've got comments or questions that you want to send in, you can type those right in there and we will see those and respond as we are able. Also, we are really excited to be joined today by Brian Becker, who's got some great insight and some great just things to share with us about committee and board and team development. But before he joins us, Kurt, I would love to hear from you about maybe one of your best or first committee experiences or team experiences.
yeah, yeah. You know my Zorro story because back in 1959 or so, I was president of the Zorro Club. So
How old were you in 1959?
yeah, about eight years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it wasn't an official club, but we followed the Disney show Zorro, and we were formed our own little club, and I was the president, and Al Lazel, my buddy, was the vice president. My sister was treasurer, and another faculty member's child was Bruce was the treasurer, and we played down in the basement, set up crates and things, and had our little meetings, and we had dues, and we were acting out what we saw people at church doing, people around us at school doing these meetings, and so we had meetings, and we had a club, and sometimes it broke out into spontaneous sword fighting, which was kind of fun too. But the thing is, what, 50 to 65 years later, 60s, whatever it is, years later, there's times I feel like we're still playing Zorro, that people are following patterns that they've just kind of inherited, kind of these implicit rules about how meetings work. So I think it's important to talk about how we structure our teams and our committees. And I'm just really delighted to have Brian Becker join us today. He's got some stories too to share, and Brian is a creative, gifted man who's been working as a consultant recently, and he works with companies and not-for-profits. He and his son Jeff wrote a book the title sounds like an oxymoron, Tender Lions, but when you think about it, it really captures what he's talking about in terms of that relationship between father and son. But he also does a lot of work with organizations, and we're just glad to have him talk about how to structure, what are some insights for teams and committees and boards. So welcome, Brian.
Welcome, Brian. We're so glad you're here with us today.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you both.
Great. Well, Brian, I would love to kind of hear from you first, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us some of your, just some of the insights that you've seen. I mean, we're moving into this season right now of rebuilding. Also feels, at least to me, like an interesting time moving into summer when a lot of people start usually to disconnect, and we're having conversation about building and rebuilding. So I'd love to hear just maybe your experiences, some of your insights about board and committee and team leadership, if you're willing to share.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So the question about what's happening right now is the observation is that people have had an intense period of isolation, maybe unlike anything they've ever experienced in their lifetime, unless they're 95 years old, which there are a lot of people left who are 95 years old. I think there's a craving, a hunger to reconnect with people. There's a hesitation to do that. People, particularly maybe those that lean more towards the extroverted sides, are maybe grieving lack of connections and don't even realize that. So how do we re-engage in ministry and church and meetings, travel? There's some big questions out there. School, I have a daughter that's a public school teacher, and that how they interact. It's just really, really a lot of big questions. I mean, we'll get over it, but how we go about doing that is really important right now. And so, yeah. Tough question. Thank you, Leah.
You're welcome. I thought I'd start with an easy one for you, Brian.
Yeah.
But, in some level, I think if there's one thing that I've become more convinced of, it's that things that have been best practices and the best way to do things with teams and boards and committees haven't changed. Mm-hmm. Maybe our awareness around those.
Right.
And, one of the reasons that Kurt and I were excited to ask you to join us today is you really do bring a lot of experience with that. And so I'd love to hear from you about some of if you brought some with you. I think you brought some slides with you to share with us. Some of your best of.
Yeah, help me out with that. I sent you 2 slides, Leah. So
sure did. Let's start right there.
Yeah. So this one, of course, looks like what anybody thinks about when they think about building a strong team or a strong committee, don't they? But there's a reason for that. It's not unlike the Zorro story that Kurt has. When I was 16, by the way, there's a point to this beyond just me. Me craving a truck when I was 16 years old. I used to drive by this truck every day. And so and then one day a for sale sign went up in the windshield of the truck. So I got myself a part-time job. I earned enough money. I went to test drive the truck. I had the money in my pocket. I was ready to buy this truck. And so it looked beautiful. It had been restored. By the way, those who are watching are car geeks. That's a 1946 Ford pickup truck. And it looked fantastic. It had been real love and care and skill had gone into refurbishing the truck. The interior's pristine. Started the truck. It sounded fantastic. It's a big V8 motor for those of you who might be into motors. And so we went for a test drive. And as soon as we pulled out of the parking lot onto the road, something wasn't right with that truck. It didn't accelerate properly. It didn't feel right to steer it. Let my foot off the accelerator to coast up to a stop sign. Something was not right. And by the time I got back to the parking lot, I talked myself out of even being interested in buying it. So as I get out of the truck, I'm getting ready to close the driver's door. And I notice that the parking brake was set just a little bit. So if you've ever had that experience, you know that it affects everything about how the vehicle is going to handle, run, accelerate, decelerate, etc. And not that long ago, I was thinking about, because most of the work that I do is with either committee structure or board development for nonprofits and ministries and that type of thing, team building. And I was thinking about how beautiful that thing looks and how much care went into designing it. Yet with the parking brake set a little bit, there's no way that it could run the way it was intended to be designed. And if you're in a ministry or nonprofit or whatever, and you have limits around I can have 9 people on my committee or whatever, and you've got somebody sitting at the table who's not fully engaged, it's like the parking brake is set a little bit. Doesn't matter how good it looks. If you're following those rules, that engagement, the communication, the trust, you can have a great plan. But if the culture isn't fostering real, honest, transparent engagement, you're not going to get high performance out of that. So that's something that I hope to be able to instill and encourage and draw out of anybody that I'm working with, whether I'm volunteering at my own church or working with my clients.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about how to take that parking brake off?
So over the years, go back 25 years, I've served on 6 or 7 different nonprofit boards. I'm on 2 right now, chairing one. And I worked in a ministry for over 10 years called Wheat Ridge. Some of you may be familiar with that. And my primary responsibility there was to connect with our ministry partners who we had made grants to help them build new ministry, sometimes starting a new nonprofit from the ground up, sometimes starting a ministry from within something that was already existing. So my experience over the last 20 some years is all around how do you build those things. And so in the last couple of years, I really started looking at where were the successful teams, what were they doing, successful committees, high performing boards. And Lee, maybe you could pop that next slide up there. And I'm going to go around this relatively quickly. There's 7 things that I've seen, maybe more than that, but 7 key things that I've seen in those teams, committees that really are successful. The first in this is this: they govern. You may have a charter, you may have bylaws, you may have a constitution, you may just have a sheet that says this is how we operate here. We elect people at a certain time of year, we meet so many times of year, we have these kinds of goals. So as a leader of that, whether you're a staff person or chairing a committee, what does it say you're supposed to do in order to be accountable and to be successful? So govern. The second thing is generate ideas. So if I'm a staff person at a small ministry, congregation, nonprofit, and I'm expected to produce things for homeless people in the community, the youth that are in the community, no matter how talented, hardworking, committed I am, I can't do it all. I can't know everything. And so I need to surround myself with this team of people that can bring what I don't have. And so how do I, as the leader of that team, help to encourage and coax and support so I can get the best from them, whether that's social media expertise or technology or some other social issue that you're trying to deal with, financial, fundraising, whatever it happens to be. And so how do I get the best out of them to have a generative environment? And I'm working with one of the Concordia universities right now, and the chair of their foundation board said the other day in a meeting, he said, don't ask us to solve small problems. He said, you've got this team full of horsepower, people that are saying, yes, I'll volunteer. Ask us to engage in something really meaningful. So that way, when they do give their time and their effort, that they're really in a generative mode. So the third thing is giving. You may need them to give their time, their expertise, their energy, their money, their connections. What is it that will help to create a culture, a way of doing things where people are like, yeah, I'll show up and I'm ready to give my testimony, my reputation, lend it to whatever the cause is. The next is to get. So maybe your committee needs donations, or maybe it needs connections to political people in the community or other nonprofits, other partners. So does the committee, does the board possess that social capital in order to have reputation and connections in the community so they can get what needs to be acquired in order to be successful? The next is to go. So by that I mean, so let's say that you're serving the youth in the community and you do events that are tutoring or cooking or whatever it happens to be. As a member of the committee or board, whatever it happens to be, I'd love to have those volunteers be there and see that in action. About a year and a half ago, I'd worked with, I live in the Chicagoland area, and I was working with an organization that does an excellent job of getting homeless people into interim housing and then hopefully to a stable type of lifestyle. And they had a couple of people on their board who'd never seen their training programs in action and had never been to one of their clinic sites. And I asked the executive director, I said, if you could get them to go and volunteer or see things in action, they'll really be able to touch the heartbeat and the mission of your organization. And so go, get out there and touch the mission, see it in action. The next thing is to get off. And by that, I don't mean like to be harsh to people, like you need to get off the committee. What I mean is that let's say that your task force says you can have up to 7 people. Well, let's say you have 2 people on the task force that really aren't engaged. Maybe they were, but they've lost their passion, or their job requires more time of them. They can't. That's if it says you can only have 7 people. Well, that's really valuable real estate in those chairs around the table. And so remove yourself or ask them to leave. They'll be happier and you'll be happier and more productive if everybody at the table is really engaged. Some organizations have like term limits. You say you can only serve for 3 years and then you have to remove yourself or whatever it happens to be. So make way and prepare for how do you replace yourself, or how do you replace that valuable person who's leaving. And so it says there's 7 and there's only 6 there, but in the heartbeat of this, right in the middle of this, the last thing is generosity. As you as a leader think about recruiting, encouraging people to join your task force or your committee, look for people who believe in that, we're the recipients of an abundant universe from a loving and generous God. And so how do we live that out? There's a lot going on in society that's pressing against that right now. Politics, finance, government, even in the church, that is like seeing things like it's as if it were a zero-sum game. Like, well, if I put my effort over here, that means there's not enough to go over here. And so that's a premise that I disagree with. So how is it that we look for people who really have that abundant John 10:10, have life and have it in abundance? So, a whirlwind around the circle there. So yeah. I'll pause.
Yeah, I imagine that you probably do that in half a day for some meetings, but
their groups will take all-day workshop and run through this with their boards. Yeah.
Or
committees.
I really like the valuable real estate, that the seat they hold is valuable real estate. Mm-hmm. Also, I think the generative piece for me is also just a good reminder to be thinking beyond the transactional level and more into the transformational stuff. Mm-hmm. The thing about Go, I was wondering, the Go, depending on what type of group it is, right? They really do need to see the bottom results of the mission.
Yeah.
And so if they're like a policy board, they need to be observing so they know the result. They also need to spend time with the stakeholders, right? They need to go pay attention to those who are investing in the program. But it depends on the board. If it's an action group, then they'll probably want to roll up their sleeves and be involved.
Yeah. Let me also add that for staff people who are finding themselves worn down because it's been a pretty intense slog the last 15 months or so, and feeling disconnected, a vacation is a good idea, but also going out and being with the people that are directly served by your ministry is a wonderful way to remind yourself and re-energize yourself about the importance of what it is that you're
doing. Yeah.
I'm struck by that too. I'm thinking about, where sometimes I think in the church, we sort of separate, these are the doers. So the youth group people are going to go hang out with the kids and take them on a weekend retreat. Then you've got, these are people that are going to sit and make financial decisions. And while it's good to use people's gifts, there's something to that. How do you connect the two to get some of that power and some of that perspective? That's really helpful for me.
Yeah. When we were just doing a little planning last week, we had a brief discussion about how when you're in budgets and planning and goals, that's very much a head space. And when you're out with the people who are directly affected, that's an emotional space. And energy comes from being in an emotional space and connection and relationship. And so what is it that we can do to help our leaders, volunteer or paid, make sure that they have a connection with that emotional space periodically? Because that's really inspiring.
Yeah, that's right. That's really good. I know it's important to talk about structure because, my partner Les Stroh talks about organizations are perfectly structured to get what they're getting. So sometimes we look at problems and we say, I've had organizations talk about we don't have a vision, we have problems with our personnel, and then I look at their structure and say, well, your structure kind of sets them up for failure. It's kind of a lower level. It's not as important as people or relationships or the actual outputs. But if your structure is bad, if you're sitting on a two-legged stool, right, it's not a good thing. So sometimes part of the solution lies in structure and also clarity. So one of the things I want to talk about today was how we use charters. And you mentioned charters, and in organizational, precedents, you start with the Constitution, the Articles of Incorporation, whatever, the bylaws, and then you have standing resolutions and you got policies. But you work your way down to the group that's actually working. Is we talk about charter, and I'd like to add covenant too. And the reason we do that is just to think more clearly about laying the foundation, so people are really clear about what is their goal and how do they want to be together. And some of the process is really about managing, I think, the alignment between being and doing. And we have a graphic for that as well. So the in every organization there's this. I think there's two alignments, and you mentioned it when you talked about emotion, Brian. I think that's a part of the being or the ethos of the organization. Then when you talk about the thinking and the planning and the finance, that may be more the doing. And we talk about in the Cornerstone factor, we talk about the alignment between the two, not a balance, but an actually oscillating back and forth between the being of the organization and then the doing of the organization. And so I think the organization really, to achieve quality, it needs both kind of like a map and a compass, right? So the compass is that North Star or that direction that you're going to, that sense of passion for a vision that's a snapshot in the hearts of the people engaged. And then you have to also be aware of the map. What's your plan? What's your strategy? What are the steps you're going to take? And of course, in today's world, sometimes you have to think off the map, and you have to realize there's going to be some detours and some obstructions. And that's when the North Star comes. That's when the compass comes back to play, because as you're moving the organization forward, especially chaotic and ambiguous kind of work, having that compass to know what direction you're heading in helps you to figure out, what do we do next? What turn should we make? Where are we headed? And even when you get off the map, what your plan was, and new things emerge, you still have that guiding point. And it's important not to mistake strategy, your strategic transactional steps with your transformational vision, because they don't always match up. They're really, it's that back and forth. Yeah. And so that leads me to think about the charter and the covenant. And so a lot of groups have a good charter, but they haven't worked on their covenant. And for me, the covenant is really kind of this agreement, explicit agreement about the way we agree to be with each other. So when I form groups, I like to talk through, what kind of great groups have you been a part of, and what are some of the key things that made them great, right? What quality, what achieved quality. And so they talk about, some of the things that are really accountability, show up on time, and usually for me, the highest level of a real productive group, their relationships have enough honesty, and then honesty and openness builds trust. And when you have honesty and trust working in your being, you get closer to achievement of high goals. But if you only have that, that's not enough. You have and I've seen a lot of startups who have all kinds of passion. I know you have too, investing in social workers are just excited about the passion, but they don't have the capacity or the competency to make a good plan, to follow through. So having just one without the other doesn't work either. So then we spend time forming a charter. And we work on the team and the relationships, but we also need to build a foundation of clarity. And so the charter, and you can find lots of different ways to form this, but I like to just work with what's the name? what are we going to call ourselves? Because, you know, that's going to be key. And if we name the team in, you know, not really aligned with the mission, it gets fuzzy. And then what are the purpose, goals, and objectives, and spell them out. These, because the objectives are going to be the steps to get towards the goals, the measurable steps that get to the goals, and then the goals will fulfill the purpose. And the purpose needs to know boundaries too, like, you know, this is a part of a bigger organization, or we are the organization. And then membership, who's in, who's out, and who could be invited in. And saying in advance, you know, we might bring in a consultant, we might bring in another person with expertise for a short time, just for solving a certain problem. But we'd like to build a team that has that fills good real estate in those chairs, right? And then issues of authority. I really think it's important for a group to know what authority they have. Because I've been with groups who were asked to give their opinions, but they thought they were also making decision. And, you know, you ask a recommendation team and you're not clear that they're only recommending, and then the board doesn't do what they recommend. You know, that causes trouble. But if you're upfront and say, our authority is to decide, our authority is to brainstorm, our authority is to implement. So now then we're clear about what's we're working toward. And then how will we communicate? Who has that? What's the way we're going to keep the organization informed of our progress? What's the time frame? And there, when do we hope to be done? And also, how much do we expect of you as a volunteer? And I like to spell out how many meetings I'm guessing there's going to be, how long those meetings are going to be, and how much work between the meetings is going to be required. And I just did this for a group, and one of the people called up and said, I saw the invitation. At first, I was ready to say no. And then I saw the charter and I said, oh, I think I can do this because you're expecting me to really contribute. And I go, wow, because usually, you know, we try to talk people, oh, it's not going to be that hard, right? And my charter says this is going to be hard. And maybe that's that giving you're talking about, you know, you want people to give. So, so I think it's foundational. And also, just as a consultant, every time we get stuck, I pull out the charter. Right? Because sometimes we get lost and we just say, well, either we need to change our goals because we bumped into something really important, or we need to stick what we said we're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I give you a little just feedback on this?
Oh, please.
Because I've known each other for 20 years or more, but I don't know that I've ever heard you walk through this before. And there are two things that came to mind. One is when you're really clear with people about what you expect of them, it makes it so much easier than you like trying to make it sound easy. And then they get there and they find out that it's not. Or if they try to make it easy, then you as a leader of the organization, you can't get done what you need to get done because people are like, well, I didn't know I was going to have to do that. And then they feel bad and you feel bad. So that's one thing. Second thing is, just a couple of months ago, one of my clients had a very, very challenging thing happen within the organization with some of the staff. That it's a teen center, a faith-based teen center, and there was some inappropriate behavior between. It wasn't like throw you in jail kind of behavior, but it was between a staff and one of the teens. And when the board got wind of that, the anxiety in the board caused them to completely forget the charter. And they all went down to the lowest level of like digging in their claws to get control over the situation. And so the executive director was like, they forgot how to lead. It's like they all lost their mind. And it is important. And yes, we have to deal with it. But if you just let me be the executive director, we are already dealing with this. And so the board went like right through into micromanagement mode of staff type of issues. And so how you, so you've got your charter, and then you've got how you're going to be with each other. People forget how they're going to be with each other when that stress level hits
Yeah,
really hard.
yeah. I was going to say it's not really a charter issue when anxiety runs. It's usually the being. There and they probably haven't gotten to a level of more openness.
Yeah.
You know, and that's common, especially for a fly-in board. You know, they meet quarterly. It's hard to do that. But but yeah, I think when they're not able to manage the emotions and people can't give feedback, you know, anxiety is pretty common. And it's more just how do we manage it when we know it's there, not to avoid it. You can't avoid it. But yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, I think our brains are, when we do get into a challenging situation, our brains are wired for safety.
Sure.
And so they want to like, you know, turn in. They don't naturally go, hey, let's push back and get a fresh perspective and take a couple of deep breaths here. They're like, we better control the situation.
Well, that's the other thing about who's in the chairs, because you know, we talk about the leader having. I've heard words like non-anxious, but there's no such thing. So it's like, who's the least anxious? And I hope that leadership would step up. And so if I'm in conflict and we get in situations where there's a lot of heated things going on, and I think the strategy of being the least anxious, and even though I'm very stressed on the inside, to practice a kind of a presence of non-anxiousness can change the room.
Yeah. You know, I think in hindsight, we sort of did what your chart did, because I facilitated a conversation with the leadership group, including the executive director, and we got our compass back.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got North Star.
Yep.
And then after they got recentered, then we went back to best practices.
Yep.
And like, oh, that's right. We're supposed to govern, not, you know, dive down into this stuff. So, but they couldn't govern until they got the North Star back.
Yeah.
Who was it? The Edward Deming, who was a grandfather of the quality control. Right. I think he's the one who said, culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah. Well, they attribute that to a lot of people. I'm going to say Brian Becker says it.
Well, I have said it a bunch of times, but I think I read it in an old Edward Deming book from 30 years ago. Because, you know, if the culture is not supportive and trusting and non-anxious or least anxious, a good plan just sits on the shelf.
Well, that brings up, that's the critical piece, is because if your organization, like we talk about subcommittees and other groups, if your organization hasn't established kind of a pattern of what a good committee looks like, then you are all playing Zorro, because whatever group shows up is going to kind of do it the way they think they should do it. And so changing that culture, like at that deeper level, that requires more training. So we you know, in the church, we delegate, we direct, and then we delegate, and we skip the coaching and supporting roles that really take, you know, help people learn how to do it. We just say, here's a committee, here's what we need done, go do it. And I think if we're going to change the culture, we got to come alongside, or at least bring in Brian Becker and talk through the other levels of how this works, and really being on that's the other piece. Did I not cover the evaluation piece on it? I think the last charter was evaluation or closure. You don't have to bring it back up, but I'll bring it up now.
Look at that.
There it is. The closure process, right? The not evaluating at the end. I like to do evaluation, adoration, appreciation, and congratulations. You know, the kind of come back and say, where did we do well? Let's look at our goals and objectives. Did we get there? Did we overestimate the time? You know, and that's engendering more excellence into the culture. if we go from one event to another without evaluating, we're not going to change the culture. We're just going to keep repeating our mistakes. In fact, that's an organizational learning disability, is not learning from mistakes. We actually get better at making our mistakes over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question for the two of you as I'm thinking about, so in my mind, I'm thinking about two different types of groups right now. So I'm thinking about the group that is not already in place. So I'm starting a new group, right? So I'm building a group. What do I do? Like, what are the best practices to start a group and do it well? And then I'm thinking about, here's the existing group. Maybe it's my, the group of parents that run Sunday school, or maybe it's the board of directors, or maybe it's, whatever. But think about both of those groups. I'd love to hear from you too, because you both have such a wealth of knowledge about it. With the group that is just coming together, what are hey, here's a couple of things I think you need to do first. And then with the group that's existing, as we're moving into what I really think people are open to thinking differently and rebuilding, what are the first couple of things you'd suggest? So can we start with the, here's a brand new group, but you guys each give me my 2 quick tips. What do I need to do? I'm DCE Leah in my congregation, and I'm starting a new committee that's going to revolutionize Sunday school or something. What should I do first?
I think the first thing you should do is ask whether you really need a committee to do it. A lot of times we form, for every problem, there's got to be a committee to fix it. And I think, I think a lot of organizations could just pull in 1 or 2 people and or turn it over. So that would be my first thing.
Can you surround yourself with a couple of smart people to help you think about the startup? And just use them as not a cabinet, but a kitchen cabinet. Use them periodically, pull them in, task force type of thing. You get good thinking from them, and then say thanks. I actually love being asked to do that, because it's a way I can help and not have to go to committee meetings once every other month for 3 hours.
Well, I'm thinking about what Kurt said about that. Here's my clear charter, right? What I'm asking you to do is help me with XYZ, not be on this committee that goes on forever, that has to have 9 people. And I'm only asking you because our Constitution says there has to be 9 people.
Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. This was several years ago. I actually wrote a piece for a periodical called Starting Smart, and I'd be happy to share that as a resource if you want to put that on your website.
Yeah,
but there's a couple of important, it's not like, here's how to do it. It's like 7 important questions you should ask yourself. And one is, if you're going to start something really significantly new, within maybe there hasn't been a youth group, or there are a lot of homeless in your neighborhood, and you're going to start a feeding program or whatever, it's going to change the leader's life in dramatic ways. And so are you really ready to take that in? Mind, body, soul. Does the leadership of the organization also have the same type of passion and commitment to stand behind you and not just go, oh yeah, Leah's going to do that, she'll take care of all that. And then when things get tough, they're like, well, that was her idea. So are they all in? Kurt, I don't know if you want to you also rethink like, if this is what our need is does that need also exist in other places out there in the community? Because maybe you just becoming a partner with some other organization could be a wonderful way to engage people without starting your own new, ministry or organization.
I love that. Yeah, I think that the idea of what you shared about the leaders being behind it, because that's that coaching and supporting role that requires more engagement, more time from the leaders. So I think the leader has to say, how many of these groups can I really manage successfully?
And what happens if it becomes really successful, or what happens if it fails?
Yeah,
because you're going to own that as the staff person, regardless. I mean, we've seen many instances of where someone started a program to, feed hungry people on a Thursday morning, and pretty soon they've got 400 people 3 days a week lined up, and it's become like an organizational fire hose that they have to manage. And not that that's not important, but it can take on with gigantic proportions.
Right. Yeah. All right, so let's switch gears, and I want to hear. So if let's talk about maybe committees or boards, those standing groups that already exist.
Right.
What would you guys suggest for especially if they're not in a place that's maybe real healthy as far as or functional the way you'd like it to be? Like, where would you start?
Well, a lot of constitutions, bylaws require what you're saying in terms of standing committees and groups. And I at some point, you have to look at that and say, is that really the best way to function? But if there are very effective and efficient groups that are out there, I think that no matter when, you need to stop and do evaluation, and you need to recharter. If you don't have a charter, you need to recharter. If you're not sure about the roles, and I think a level of honesty at some point is, really, really critical.
Yeah, I use the language. It might be better to restart than it's perhaps easier to do a restart than a turnaround.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And if you never let people get off the bus,
right,
and you don't make it clear that it's time to change, but most of the recruitment is already stretching, and they're grasping to fill those roles. And that's a sad thing. I think they'd be better off not having it than to teach people the inefficiency. So why would I join a group? And this, my partner Les talks about competence, community, significance, enjoyment. If the group's not expecting competence from me, if I'm not working on something significant, if there's not community, a good sense of relationships, why would I engage? And so I think you're right, Brian. I think restart and reboot. However, I've seen groups say, well, we're just going to disregard our Constitution and do it this way. And I go, yeah, don't do that.
Then they try to back into it later.
Yeah. Well, our Constitution says this, but we don't do it that way anyway. And I go, well, that doesn't work, because as soon as there is a major problem, now you have no defense.
There's something that happens in an organization when either staff or volunteers get, quote, fired for the right reason. Some people's feelings are hurt, although frequently the message will go very quickly through the organization, like they're serious about doing quality work here.
Yeah.
And to keep the old guard on board, because they're the old guard, makes it nearly impossible to recruit new, energized, talented leadership, because they don't want to have to get involved with all of that messy emotional stuff that's tied to something unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, that's the other piece, is that some of the actions of leadership needs to be dramatic, like you're saying, because you don't get your vision across if there's no price to be paid. So if it's a really passionate vision, but I'm going to continue to coddle dysfunction, then I don't really.
One other, maybe a quick answer, Leah, to a really good question, which is oftentimes, so somebody says, okay, how do we fix this? We know that it's not right. Oftentimes people get into problem solving mode and look back at what's wrong. And I've been finding the last couple of years, it's almost a waste of time to problem solve. And it's, I believe, better to say, okay, let's just paint an accurate picture of where we are. What is reality? We're not going to blame or complain about people who may have been the best. And then let's say, what do we want it to look like in a year or two? What could it look like for the sake of the organization, the community, the ministry, the kids? And so you give people let them dream, let them have vision. I mean, in the university, they call that, there's a fancy name for that, that type of
appreciative inquiry.
Appreciative inquiry, where you look to possibilities, and that puts people in the emotional space, not the head space,
right?
Where they'll be like, "Oh, we could do that," and okay, well, if we're here and we want to be there, what are the steps? And then you don't have to get into like, okay, those people didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, and Leah, that reminds me of our previous episode when we talked about managing polarities, right?
It does. Yeah, I was just thinking that exact same thing.
Yeah, because it's not problem solving. It's really it's kind of managing two good things, and that's often where groups get high centered.
Yeah. Let me add one last quick tip, and that is most people, when they start to recruit, they look at their contact list. They start with who. Don't start with who. That's the second question. Start with what. What type of profile, what are you looking for? Oh, we're looking for people with reputation, or we're looking for people with legal or social media or money or political. So create the profile. It's like astronauts. You look. What was that movie? The Right Stuff. Relentless pursuit of the right stuff. So get the profile, then go to the who question. Who do we know? And like a baseball team, you build your long list, and then you figure out who you want, and then you send somebody to recruit that they can't say no to.
I like that.
I like that.
It's like courting. It's like wooing.
It is courting. And I always, if I go after someone I really want to be on my team, I just ask them to start praying about it. Don't give me a yes or a no. Here's what the vision is. Here's what we're hoping to accomplish, and just pray about it. Because I know you're gonna, your life is probably already slam busy.
Yeah.
And then they give me a good answer back.
Yeah. And I encourage my clients, like, let's say, for example, there's somebody they want to have on their board of directors. I say, don't ask them to be on the board. Just start inviting them to your events.
Yeah. Yep.
They'll see those fine arts kids or that tumbling group or that homeless shelter, and they'll come to some events and they'll start to fall in love, or they'll select out. They'll like, that's not my deal. Well, you don't want to recruit somebody like that onto your committee. Yeah. But if they come closer, then you're like, aha, we have a fit here. So take your time.
Yep. That's their compass. If the compass lines up with their compass.
And then recruiting becomes easy.
Yeah.
I always feel like if someone asks me to do something that seems significant and that I think I can do, like I've got the skills to do it, I want to say yes to that. Now, I might in some seasons have to say no. But for the most part, if I want to do it because it feels significant and I think I can do it, I'm in. But I want somebody to point that out to me instead of saying, hey, we need somebody else on this committee. Like, I don't want to be somebody else on your committee. I don't have time and even some people spend a lot of social time, especially in women's groups, as the women in this call, doing a lot of social in the meeting. And it's good. Like, I want relationships, but I have friends to drink wine with. Like, I don't need to just come to the meeting to drink wine. I'm happy to do that if there's significance to what we're doing. And I'm happy to go the extra mile if I see that significance. I like that for the ask the person, ask them to pray about it. Cause then, then let the Holy Spirit work on that. And let them know why, and let them get in proximity enough to know if they care enough to make that happen. That's big.
I think that is, you just outlined it again. It's competence, community, and significance. And the community is not necessarily social as much as it is, I'm engaged in the body of Christ kind of feeling. It's like
belonging.
I belong, and I know Brian's got these skills, Leah has these, and here's where I can use mine, and we complement each other. And so I think community relationships are really defined in more of the energy that comes from our synergy of working together. And there's a social benefit too, because the next meeting I'm having with the finance committee is going to be at the pub. So
yes, I like that meeting. Well, guys, we are actually running just a little over. I didn't want to break up the conversation because it's so good, but I do want to, before we wrap up, just make sure that folks that are watching have a chance to connect with both of you and find out what you're doing. And I can speak to both of these gentlemen. Both Kurt and Brian are incredibly gifted when it comes to group committee board development. And if you want to get in touch with Brian, so Brian is with Leaders Edge, is his organization. You can connect with him here at leadersedge.me and find out more about what he does. And then Kurt also pointed to it at the beginning, but not only does he do this kind of committee and board work, but he also is an author and has written a really great book with his son. Brian, would you share a little bit more with us about the book?
Tender Lions is the subtitle is Building the Vital Relationship Between Father and Son. And the short version of that story is that about 20 years ago, I was a pretty dysfunctional dad and brought a lot of pain on my family, and we put it back together in a really healthy way. And a few years ago, my son, who's now 33, we said, well, maybe our story of how we were pretty good, then we were broken, and how it's good again, maybe that would be inspirational and helpful to other families, because the father-son relationship is a big issue in society today. A lot of kids are fatherless. And so anyhow, it's a story filled with hope, but there's also a lot of ideas and helps along the way about how to rebuild relationships. And it's for mom. There's more women that buy the book than men, I think. So it's really helpful for rebuilding family structure. And it's a faith-based approach to that.
Great, thank you. And then also, most of you watching this know Kurt a little bit, but I think most of us maybe know you in different areas, things that you do. But one of the pieces that Kurt does alongside really coaching leaders, which is his passion, which is why folks like me are around being leaders, probably more effectively than I was before I met you. Actually, definitely more effectively than I was before I met you. But also does some consulting and board work as well. And you can connect with Kurt through our Emergent Leader website or at kurtbickel.com as well.
Also, there's I don't know if we mentioned, if you go to that my website, kurtbickel.com, you can find a book called Structure Your Church for Mission, which talks about a board, using more of a board of directors than a church council, and
awesome.
why.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for your time. If nothing else, I got a lot out of today. So thank you for that. It's like my free coaching. I come in here, I get like the best people, and I get to hear all the things that you have to do. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Great to be with you and everybody online with us today.
And we'll be back next month with Bill Woolsey in June. So we'll send out some information coming up about that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Brad.